In the small town of Vance, Texas, during the late 1930s, young Leon Jefferson worked as a shoeshine boy just outside the town's main bank. It was a time of racial segregation, and the lines between white and black communities were firmly drawn. Though Leon's job seemed ordinary, it was far from it to him. He saw it as an opportunity, a window into the world of wealth and power. Each day, Leon carefully listened to the bank employees' and customers' conversations, absorbing the language of money and finance. He even kept a small notebook where he jotted down key phrases and strategies he overheard. One day, a chauffeur for one of the bank's clients caught Leon listening and accused him of spying. He threatened to tell Leon's father if he didn't stop eavesdropping. That evening, Leon's father, Marcus, discovered the notebook filled with scribbles and complex calculations. While impressed by his son's intelligence, Marcus was also cautious, reminding Leon that black people had little chance of getting ahead in a world controlled by white men. But Leon wasn't discouraged. He believed in a future where he could be more than what society dictated. He wanted to break free of the boundaries set for him, and he dreamed of owning property, something that would give him and others in his community a foothold in a world designed to exclude them. Leon knew he had to work harder than anyone else, and he was prepared to do just that. The bank, with its grand columns and important-looking people coming in and out, represented everything Leon aspired to. He wanted to understand how money flowed, how deals were made, and how power was wielded. He knew that if he could unlock these secrets, he could change not only his life, but also the lives of countless others in his community. Every night, Leon would review his notes, trying to piece together the puzzle of finance and property ownership. His father, Marcus, was both proud and fearful for his son. He saw Leon's potential, but he also knew the dangers of ambition for a black man in the South. "Keep your head down, son," Marcus would often say. "They don't like it when we try to rise above our place." But Leon was determined to rise, no matter the cost. He had a fire in him that couldn't be extinguished by fear. Leon's dream would take him far from Vance, Texas, to a place where he could truly build something of his own. He knew that someday, he wouldn't just be shining the shoes of the wealthy. He would be one of them. And more importantly, he would lift others along with him, proving that the barriers society had built were not insurmountable. Leon was ready to defy the odds, and this small beginning was just the first step towards something much greater. 15 years later, Leon and his wife, Julia, moved to Los Angeles, California, along with their young son. The year was 1954, and California represented hope, a chance to escape the rigid segregation of the South. They stayed with Julia's uncle, Thomas, in a cramped apartment above his restaurant. The space was small, but it was a start, and Leon had bigger plans in mind. Thomas urged Leon to get a job at a local factory to help support his family, but Leon had other ambitions that went far beyond a factory job. Leon began exploring the real estate market in Los Angeles. He knew that the black neighborhoods were overcrowded and that the demand for decent housing was on the rise. He wanted to invest in properties that would give black families the opportunity to move into better areas, breaking the cycle of limited opportunities. One day, while driving through the city, Leon spotted a rundown building for sale in a predominantly white neighborhood. The building was in disrepair, but Leon saw potential. He knew that if he could renovate it, he could provide good housing for black families who were looking for a better life. When Leon brought the idea to Julia, she was initially hesitant. She knew the risks. They would be attracting attention, and not the good kind. Buying property in a white neighborhood would be seen as crossing a line, and that could bring trouble. But Julia trusted Leon's instincts. He had always been determined and forward-thinking. If anyone could make it work, it was Leon. To make this dream a reality, Leon needed an investor, someone who could help with the financial burden. Julia decided to introduce Leon to an old friend of hers, Joe Morris. Joe was a successful nightclub owner, well known in the community for his charisma and connections. When they met, Joe listened as Leon passionately laid out his vision. But Joe was skeptical. He mocked Leon's dream, saying it was foolish to think that a black man could break into the white real estate market. To Joe, the risk was too high, and the barriers too formidable. Feeling insulted, Leon left the meeting, his frustration boiling over. It wasn't the first time someone doubted him, but it stung nonetheless. Julia, however, never wavered. She believed in Leon more than anyone. She spoke to Joe privately, convincing him to reconsider. She told him about Leon's determination, his work ethic, and the potential impact of his vision, not just for their family, but for the entire community. Joe eventually agreed, though cautiously. He admired Leon's grit, even if he thought the plan was risky. He decided to back Leon, but warned him that they were stepping into dangerous territory. With Joe's backing, Leon was ready to take his first step into the Los Angeles real estate market. It was a risky venture, but Leon knew that nothing worth having came without a fight. He was determined to prove everyone wrong and build a future that would lift not just his family, but his entire community. With Joe's backing, Leon approached the building's owner, Charles Edwards, an Irish immigrant with a sharp business mind. Charles was known for his shrewd negotiating skills, and he wanted $40,000 for the property, a price that Leon simply couldn't afford. Determined, Leon tried to negotiate, offering $30,000 upfront and the remaining $10,000 once the building was fully leased. Charles listened, impressed by Leon's market knowledge and persistence, but still hesitant to take such a risk with a newcomer. Leon didn't give up. He noticed a calendar on Charles's desk with the name of the bank and the manager, Richard Bennett, who handled Charles's finances. It was a clue, and Leon decided to use it. He went to the bank and asked to speak to Richard. The bank's secretary initially dismissed him, suggesting that he leave a message instead. But Leon wasn't deterred. He waited for hours, refusing to budge, until Richard finally agreed to see him. Leon laid out his plan in detail, the potential of the property, the demand for housing, and his own vision for the community. Richard was skeptical, but there was something about Leon's conviction that made him pause. He agreed to consider it. That evening, Leon returned home exhausted but hopeful. Hours later, the phone rang. It was Charles. He had heard from Richard about Leon's visit to the bank and was both annoyed and intrigued. Charles didn't like the idea of Leon using his name without permission, but he couldn't help admiring Leon's boldness. After a long pause, Charles agreed to act as a guarantor for the loan. It was a breakthrough. Leon had secured the building. His persistence had paid off, and this victory felt like the first real step toward making his dreams a reality. To celebrate, Julia decided to take Leon to Joe's Jazz Club. The atmosphere was alive with music, laughter, and the hum of people enjoying themselves. Leon felt a mix of relief and excitement. Finally, a glimmer of success. As they settled in, Joe noticed them from across the room and made his way over. He had heard about Leon's success and wanted to congratulate him. This time, Joe's demeanor was different. He wasn't mocking or dismissive. Instead, there was genuine respect in his eyes. "You did it, Leon," Joe said, a grin spreading across his face. "I have to admit, I like seeing a black man succeed, especially one with as much drive as you have." He raised his glass in a toast, and Leon felt a swell of pride. It wasn't just about the building, it was about what it represented. A step toward equality, a step toward proving that the barriers they faced could be broken. Leon knew this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more people doubting him, more barriers to break. But for now, he allowed himself a moment to savor the victory. He was ready for whatever came next, determined to keep pushing forward for himself, his family, and his community. Leon moved into one of the apartments in the newly purchased building and began making renovations. It wasn't just about fixing up a place to live, it was about creating something better, not only for himself but for the other tenants as well. However, not everyone was happy about the changes. One of the tenants, an elderly white woman, was furious when she found out that Leon was the new owner. She called the police, accusing Leon of impersonating the landlord. When the police arrived, Leon calmly showed them the property deed, forcing them to leave. The encounter only strengthened Leon's resolve, and he realized that changing the status quo would mean facing these kinds of challenges head-on. Leon and Joe decided to take things further. They formed a partnership and began buying more properties in white neighborhoods. Joe used his connections to open doors that were otherwise closed to them, while Leon handled negotiations, renovations, and the day-to-day management. They brought in Leon's cousin, Matt, to help with the work. Matt was young, eager, and willing to learn. Under Leon's guidance, he quickly became an integral part of the team, managing tenants, and overseeing minor repairs. As Leon and Joe's portfolio grew, so did the resistance they faced from the white community. Banks were reluctant to lend to them, often making excuses or setting unrealistic terms. Some property owners refused to even entertain the idea of selling to a black buyer. But Leon was resourceful. He found creative ways around these obstacles, structuring deals that minimized risk for sellers and tirelessly building relationships with people who were willing to take a chance on him. He learned to speak the language of finance fluently and used his knowledge to outmaneuver those who tried to block his path. There were setbacks and small victories, but Leon and Joe kept pushing forward. Eventually, they owned a significant number of buildings across several neighborhoods. These buildings provided quality housing to black families who had long been excluded from better areas. For many, it was their first chance to live in a neighborhood with good schools, parks, and opportunities, things that had always been just out of reach. Leon was proud of what they were accomplishing, but he knew this was just the beginning. With their success, Leon finally moved his family out of the cramped apartment above Uncle Thomas's restaurant. He bought a beautiful house in a neighborhood that once would have been impossible for them to access. The day they moved in was a moment of triumph. Julia beamed as she walked through the front door, and their son ran excitedly through the rooms, exploring his new home. For Leon, it was a symbol of everything he had worked for. Not just the physical house, but the idea that barriers could be broken and that the future could be different. Leon knew there were still many challenges ahead. The resistance they faced was far from over, but he also knew that each step they took was paving the way for others. He was building more than just a business. He was building a legacy of hope and possibility for his community. Just when everything seemed to be going well, tragedy struck. Charles Edwards, Leon's original partner and guarantor, passed away suddenly, leaving a significant void in Leon's plans. Charles had been a key supporter, and without him, Leon found himself facing an unexpected challenge. Margaret, Charles's widow, was not interested in continuing her late husband's partnership with Leon. She made it clear that she wanted nothing to do with him or his ventures. Margaret offered to buy out Leon's share of their properties, but at a fraction of their actual value, effectively cutting him out of the business they had worked so hard to build. Leon was devastated. Their partnership agreement had been largely verbal, and without Charles to back him up, Leon had little legal recourse. He tried to reason with Margaret, but she was firm. She wanted control, and she had the leverage to take it. Leon felt the weight of everything he had built starting to slip away, and the fear of losing it all gnawed at him. Desperate to hold on to what he had worked for, Leon decided to approach Richard Bennett, the bank manager who had originally helped secure his loan. Leon hoped that Richard might be able to provide a solution or at least some form of support. However, when he arrived at the bank, he found that Richard had already aligned himself with Margaret. Richard was unwilling to help, and Leon was left with no allies. The realization hit him hard. He was truly on his own. Feeling cornered, Leon knew he needed to think bigger if he wanted to survive this setback. It wasn't enough to own properties. He needed to have control over the very systems that determined success or failure. He needed access to capital on his terms. The answer came to him one evening as he sat in his now empty office, staring at the paperwork that symbolized everything he was about to lose. The only way to ensure financial stability for himself and his community was to own the institutions that controlled access to capital. He set his sights on something far more ambitious, buying a bank. Leon knew this wouldn't be easy. Banks were the gatekeepers of opportunity, and the thought of a black man owning one was unthinkable to most. But Leon also knew that true change could only come if people like him had power, real power that could challenge the status quo. He needed to be able to provide loans to people in his community, to give them the opportunities that had been denied for so long. With renewed determination, Leon began researching the banking industry. He studied the regulations, the requirements, and the market conditions. He knew that he would face fierce opposition, but he also knew that this was the way forward, not just for him, but for every black family that had ever been told no by those in power. The dream had grown bigger, and Leon was ready to take the next step, no matter how daunting it seemed. This was no longer just about business. It was about changing the game entirely. Leon returned to Joe with his bold idea. He wanted to buy a bank in Texas, the very place where he had once been chased away as a shoeshine boy. It was an audacious plan, one that spoke to the heart of Leon's mission, giving power to the people who had been denied it for so long. Joe was hesitant at first. Buying a bank was risky, and it would draw significant attention, especially in a conservative state like Texas. The potential backlash was real, and the stakes were high. But Leon was determined. He wanted to provide fair loans to black families and create opportunities that had been denied to them for generations. Joe eventually agreed, recognizing the importance of what Leon was trying to achieve. This was about more than just business. It was about changing lives. They brought Matt in as well. Matt, who had grown considerably in his role over the years, was excited by the prospect of expanding their influence. Together, they began planning the next big step in their journey. They approached Robert Florence Sr., the owner of a struggling bank in Vance, Texas. Florence was weary of the banking business and ready to sell, but he had one condition. His son, Robert Jr., had to remain on as a manager. It was a stipulation that Leon and Joe reluctantly agreed to, knowing that it was the only way to secure the deal. The sale went through, and suddenly, Leon found himself in control of an institution that had once represented everything that stood in his way. With the bank under their control, Leon wasted no time in making changes. He reached out to local black church leaders and community organizers to identify potential borrowers, people who had been locked out of the system for far too long. He offered fair loan terms that allowed families to buy homes, start businesses, and build a future. For the first time, the people in his community were being given a real chance to succeed. It was a revolutionary move, and it didn't go unnoticed. Word spread quickly about what Leon was doing. Some praised him for his courage and vision, while others, especially those in positions of power, saw him as a threat. The local newspapers began running stories about the radical changes happening at the bank. There were whispers in the community, and the tension was palpable. Leon knew that what they were doing was going to ruffle feathers, but he also knew it was necessary. The only way to break the cycle of poverty and exclusion was to create access to opportunity. Despite the challenges, the impact was undeniable. Families who had once been stuck in a cycle of renting in poor conditions were now buying homes. Small businesses were opening, and the community began to thrive in ways it hadn't before. Leon's vision was coming to life, and it was beautiful to see. He knew there would be more battles ahead, more people who would try to tear down what they were building. But for now, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what they had accomplished. They had bought a bank. They had given people hope. And that was just the beginning. Robert Jr. was unhappy with the new direction the bank was taking. He had always envisioned inheriting the bank from his father and running it as it had always been, catering exclusively to the white community. Now, with Leon and Joe at the helm, things were changing fast, and Robert Jr. could not stand it. Determined to regain control, he began working behind the scenes to undermine their efforts. He spread rumors about the bank's financial stability, hinting that the new leadership was jeopardizing everything the bank had stood for. He questioned their lending practices, whispering to anyone who would listen that Leon and Joe were reckless and irresponsible. One day, Robert Jr. decided to escalate his efforts. He tipped off federal regulators, alleging misconduct within the bank. It wasn't long before an investigation was launched, and Leon, Joe, and Matt were accused of fraudulent practices. The accusations were serious, and soon they found themselves summoned to testify before the Senate. The hearings were grueling, a barrage of questions aimed at discrediting everything they had worked for. Senators grilled them about their motives, implying that their real goal was to destabilize the financial system rather than uplift the community. The pressure was immense, and the public scrutiny even greater. The hearings were covered extensively by the media, and every move Leon and Joe made was dissected. But Leon was not one to back down. He knew that this was about more than just him or the bank. This was about the future of his community. When his turn came to speak, Leon made an impassioned plea. He spoke from the heart about the systemic discrimination that Black Americans had faced for generations. He talked about his own journey, from a young boy shining shoes outside a bank that wouldn't let him in, to standing before the Senate, fighting for the right to give his community a fair chance. His words were powerful. He spoke of the barriers that had been placed in front of him, not just by individuals, but by an entire system designed to keep people like him from succeeding. He described the families who had finally been able to buy homes because of the loans they had received, the small businesses that had opened, and the hope that was beginning to take root in the community. He argued that what they were doing wasn't about destabilizing anything. It was about giving people a fair shot at the American dream. Leon's speech resonated with many. The public began to take notice, and the narrative started to shift. People saw the determination in his eyes and heard the sincerity in his voice. They understood that this was a man who had fought his entire life against the odds and who now wanted to help others do the same. The hearings were far from over, and the battle was still uphill, but Leon's words had struck a chord. For the first time, it seemed like they might have a real chance, not just to save the bank, but to change the future. Despite Leon's powerful speech, he and Joe were convicted of misappropriation of funds and sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. It was a harsh blow, not just to them personally, but to everything they had worked so hard to build. Matt, on the other hand, was spared. He had cooperated with the authorities during the investigation, and his compliance earned him leniency. For Leon, this betrayal cut deep, but he refused to let it extinguish his hope. He knew that what they had started was bigger than any one person, even himself. Life in prison was challenging, but Leon found solace in knowing that his efforts had not been in vain. While behind bars, he received word that Robert Jr. had swooped in and purchased the bank at a fraction of its true value. The news was disheartening. Much of the progress they had made seemed to be undone, but Leon was nothing if not resilient. He had anticipated that they might lose the bank, and he had prepared for it. Before the Senate hearings, Leon had instructed Matt to sell some of their remaining assets and use the funds to purchase 2 properties in the Bahamas, a place where he and Joe could start over when they were eventually released. 3 years passed, and Leon and Joe were finally freed. Walking out of those prison gates, they were greeted by Julia, Leon's steadfast wife, who had stood by him through every hardship. Her smile was filled with pride and unwavering belief in Leon. Despite everything they had lost, Leon felt a surge of hope. He and Joe had faced the worst, and now it was time to rebuild. Julia drove them straight to the airport, where they boarded a plane to the Bahamas, leaving behind the memories of their struggles in Texas. In the Bahamas, Leon and Joe settled into the luxurious homes that Matt had secured for them. The tropical breeze, the swaying palm trees, and the endless blue horizon were a stark contrast to the cold, gray walls of the prison they had left behind. Though they had lost their bank, they had not lost their spirit. The houses were more than just a place to live. They represented a new beginning, a chance to start fresh and continue their mission in a different way. Leon and Joe knew that their influence could extend beyond the borders of the United States. They began investing in local businesses, helping to uplift the Bahamian community. They funded scholarships for underprivileged students and worked to create opportunities for people who had been overlooked. Though they were far from home, their hearts remained dedicated to the same cause, empowering those who had been denied a fair chance. In the end, Leon realized that true success wasn't just about owning a bank or acquiring wealth. It was about making a lasting impact, about giving others the chance to dream and achieve. They may have lost a battle, but they had not lost the war. As Leon and Joe stood on the beach, watching the sunset, they knew that their journey was far from over. They had been knocked down, but they had risen again, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to make a difference. Leon and Joe's efforts were not in vain. The attention their case received led to a public outcry, and in 1968, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act, which prohibited discrimination in housing and lending. It was a major victory for civil rights, and it would not have happened without the sacrifices that Leon and Joe made. Though they had faced setbacks and lost their bank, their struggle had ignited a movement, one that demanded equality and fair treatment for all. In the Bahamas, Leon and Joe continued their work. They invested in real estate, not for profit, but for the community. They used their wealth to support civil rights initiatives back in the United States, funding scholarships for young Black students and providing loans to small business owners who needed a hand to get started. Though they were far from home, their hearts remained with the community they had fought so hard for. The ocean between them and the United States was vast, but their influence reached across it, touching lives and changing futures. One sunny afternoon, Leon sat on the veranda of his home, gazing out at the turquoise ocean that stretched endlessly before him. The salty breeze carried with it memories of his past. A young shoeshine boy in Texas, listening to the whispers of wealth and dreaming of a different life. He thought of the battles he had fought, the sacrifices he had made, and the victories that had seemed impossible. From a shoeshine boy to a bank owner to a civil rights advocate, his journey was one that many had doubted, but it was proof that perseverance and courage could change the course of history. As Leon reflected on his life, he knew that his story was not just about him. It was about every person who had ever been told they couldn't succeed because of the color of their skin. It was about the dream of equality and the belief that, with determination and courage, anything was possible. Leon had faced barriers at every turn, but he had refused to let them define him. He had refused to accept that the world could not change. And in the end, he had been part of making that change a reality. Leon turned to Joe, who was sitting beside him, watching the waves roll in and out. "We did it," Leon said, a smile spreading across his face. "We may not have won every battle, but we changed the game." Joe nodded, lifting his glass of rum in a toast. "To the future," he said, his voice filled with hope. "And to those who will come after us. May they dream bigger and fight harder." They clinked their glasses together, the sound of their toast mixing with the rustle of palm leaves and the crash of waves against the shore. And with that, they toasted to the legacy they had built, a legacy of hope, resilience, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. They knew their work was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever came next, confident that they had paved the way for a better tomorrow.